Hi everyone, and welcome to this last chapter of our ecology adventure. In this chapter we will talk about pollution and disasters. In today's presentation particularly, we will talk about pollution in a more general way, and from the next presentation we will talk more about consequences and how to resolve them. My name is Divna. For the beginning, just to explain what pollution actually is. So even though you can see the, let's say, general description of it as the introduction of a contaminant to the natural environment that causes adverse change, the main problem with pollution in today's society is that it is an addition of any substance or form of energy to the environment. But the main thing is the rate of it is faster than the environment can accommodate it by some kind of dispersion or breakdown or recycling or storage in some harmless form. So even though we can say that the first environmental pollution started with the first man discovered fire and later with metal manufactured, the main problem of today's environmental pollution, which basically is started to be recorded in the 19th century and really hooked up in 50s or 20th century, but it's all connected in industrialization. The main problem of pollution is the rate of input of those harmful substances into the environment, and it happens by the speed that nature cannot really cope with. So as mentioned, pollutants can be in a form of chemical or energy. So under chemical, most usual and harmful are, for example, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen oxides, and also something that's called CFC or chlorofluorocarbons that are released from refrigerators or air conditions, deodorant, and insect repellents. So those are the substances that remain in our nature without nature's idea how to manage them and make them harmless. Those are chemical compounds that are harmful, and under physical or energy contaminants, we mostly think of noise, heat, or light. This is new date idea of contaminants, especially light and noise, and we will talk especially about those as well. In this chart, we can see concentrations of pollutants in air from 2000s till 2010, and you can see how the rapid incline of bad substances in the air, and it's really obvious. So it is really important question of today's ecology, a modern living style of modern society. So as I mentioned, the physical and chemical contaminants together for both groups is that they can be coming from nature itself, or it can be man-made, so-called anthropogenic. Thing is, the nature coming pollutants and the levels that nature itself can cope with, but all the additions are made usually by people, and that's why nature is struggling coping with it. It's interesting to know that natural resources had been stored virtually untouched in the earth for millions of years. But since the start of the Industrial Revolution I mentioned, vast amounts of these resources had been exploited with a period of just a couple of hundred of years at unmanageable rates, with all waste from the exploitation going straight into the environment and seriously damaging its natural processes. So the main trouble is the rate of the impact. Next to concrete type of resources, the pollutants we produce, those anthropogenic ones, come from two types of resources. They can be point resource or non-point. Under point source, we consider a single identifiable source. An example for that would be like a smokestack of a coal burning power or industrial plant, or the drain pipe of a factory. Non-point resources are dispersed and often difficult to identify. Examples would be like pesticides blown from the land into the air and runoff of fertilizers and pesticides from farmland, lawns, gardens, and so on. And it all ends up in streams and lakes. It is, of course, much easier and cheaper to identify and control or prevent pollution from a point source than from widely dispersed non-point source. On the other hand, there are two main types of pollutants. So as you can see, biodegradable and non-biodegradable. Biodegradable pollutants are harmful materials that can be broken down by natural processes, in theory, like drain pipes, like human waste and in newspapers. Non-degradable pollutants are harmful materials that nature process could not break down. An example for that are toxic chemicals like lead and mercury and arsenic and so on. Basically, nature doesn't have an answer how to treat these elements when they end up in the nature. Depending on what environmental resource is endangered by pollutant effect, main types of pollutions would be air, water, or land pollutants. And each of them can be affected by mostly any type of pollutant, so chemical or energetic. Here I'm mostly thinking of noise, because sometimes it is treated as a separate, but actually I don't think it is correct, because it can affect any of these levels of nature or biodiversity. Noise can be polluting air as well as water and land, so it is just a type of a pollution, but not a form of a pollution. Also, I would like to add one more type, which I'm not really sure where it belongs, but it's for sure playing a great role in earth damaging, and it's deforestation. And what it causes is soil runoff, oxygen production, and loss of habitat. And that all directly or indirectly somehow it affects the processes on earth to develop on a certain way that the nature is used to, and it gets interrupted. Air is mainly a mixture of various gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide and nitrogen mostly, and these are present in a particular ratio. So whenever there is any imbalance in the ratio of these gases, air pollution is caused. So as I mentioned, pollutions can come from nature or can be man-made. So under nature we consider forest fires, ash from smoking volcanoes, dust or decay of organic matter, and so on. And by man-made, pollutions in the air ends up due to pollution explosions, deforestations, urbanization, and industrializations as a major sources of pollutants. Certain activities of human beings release several pollution in air, such as carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrocarbons, oxides of nitrogen, then as mentioned, lead, arsenic, radioactive matter, and dust. The major threat comes from burning of fossil fuels, as you probably know, such as coal or petroleum products, and thermal power plants, automobiles, and industries are major sources of air pollution as well. Due to the progress in atomic energy sector, there has been an increase in radioactivity in the atmosphere. So, for example, mining activities adds to air pollution in the form of a particular matter. And a progress in agriculture, due to use of fertilizers and pesticides, has also contributed towards air pollution. So, as mentioned millions of times before, it's all connected, and due to the nature connectivity, everything we input somehow ends up somewhere else in the different ways. So it is not really restricted. There is no strict borders or how you can stop pollutants from remaining only in this specific small area, because somehow it will spread around and infect much more than we can predict. Also, cutting trees and cleaning of forests has led to increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it led, as I mentioned, it's really connected. So the more carbon dioxide atmosphere is leading to global warming, and it's basically the consequence of greenhouse effect that is caused by increased level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Also, ozone or O3 depletion has resulted in UV radiation striking our Earth, rising also the temperature. Everything is connected, and even though people trying to predict, to make all these assumptions and models to calculate the effects, nature can really surprise because too many things are inputted together and connected that surprise are always present in any form of life on Earth. Next to mention water pollution, and it is one of the prime necessities of life, as we know, water. So with increasing number of people, for example, dependent on these resources, water has become a scarce commodity. Pollution makes even the limited available water unify for use. Water is said to be polluted when there is any physical, biological, or chemical change in water quality that adversely affects living organisms or make water unsuitable for use. So water can be chemically affected or biologically as well. So for example, if there is a bacteria population unbalanced, water is not drinkable for human use. So it can be affected in many ways. Sources of water pollution are mainly factories, power plants, coal mines, or oil wells. They are situated either close to water sources or away from sources, and somehow they end up. As I mentioned, it's all connected. So you have underground water sources. So pesticides used for plants end up by rain in the lower layers of ground and reach the groundwater that ends up in some river or stream that ends up in the ocean and evaporates, goes into the clouds, and return as a rain in thousands of kilometers away. So you cannot really stop once it's in the system. Pollutants, they're really hard to get restricted from, but this is something we will talk about in the next presentation. The harmful effects of water pollutants would be that human beings become victims of various waterborne diseases. So example, cholera or dysentery or hepatitis or typhoid and so on. Next is the presence of acid or alkalines in the water, and it destroys the microorganisms, so the balance I mentioned, thereby hindering the self-purification process in rivers or water bodies. Agriculture is affected badly due to polluted water, and marine ecosystems are affected adversely. So, a direct example would be if you put pesticides in the water, and directly by using for plants, and then you use the same water from the same river to water those plants are doubly affected. Also, the sewage waste promotes growth of phytoplankton in water bodies, causing reduction of dissolved oxygen. And maybe this picture with dead fish could be an example of that. So there is specific types of algae are developed under those hypoxygen moments, and they are produced by a higher rate of organic matter in the water. So different type of algae develop. They use all the oxygen. Basically they suck all the oxygen from water, so there's not enough oxygen in water for other living creatures, and they just die, like you can see on this picture with fish. Also, poisonous industrial waste present in water bodies affect fish population next to the lack of oxygen, and the quality of underground water is also affected due to toxicity of pollutants on the surface waters. As well, physical, biological, and radiological quality of water is the injuries to its uses. So the term water pollution generally refers to human-induced changes to water quality, because in the lower levels, nature is capable of refreshing itself, so self-purification, but if the input is too high, it cannot cope with and it gets damaged. Thus, the discharge of toxic chemicals from industries or the release of human or livestock waste into a nearby water body is definitely considered a pollution. And the contamination of groundwater of water bodies like rivers, lakes, and wetlands, estuaries, and oceans can threaten the health of human and aquatic life in general. The principal contaminants of water include toxic chemicals, nutrients, biodegradable organics, and bacterial viral pathogens. So as you mentioned, it could be degradable and non-degradable. It is not even degradable ones. If put in a too high concentration, they are also really harmful for the environment because they use all the oxygen or whatever I mentioned before. So even though it's in lower level less harmful, in higher concentrations they're as harmful as non-degradable. So water pollutants can also affect human health. When pollutants enter the body via skin exposure or through direct consumption of contaminated drinking water and contaminated food, prime pollutants including DDT and PCBs, they persist in the natural environment and bioaccumulation occurs in the tissues of aquatic organisms. That is also, I don't know if it's to say if it's direct or indirect, because it directly affects humans. So if the fish is living in the water with a high level of mercury, for example, which is the case with some tuna species, they accumulate that mercury in their tissues, and when you eat the tuna, you directly eat mercury, which is definitely harmful for your health, for human health. These prolonged and persistent organic pollutants are transformed up to the food chain, as I explained to you, and they can reach level of concern in fish species that are eaten by humans. Moreover, bacteria and viral pathogens can pose a public health risk for those who drink contaminated water or eat raw shellfish from polluted water bodies. So that's why you need to wash really a lot the fruit and veggies. That's why you need to cook really good, because it's all polluted mostly. And we also need to pay special attention to our diet due to all the chemicals we use to have a higher production, but actually quality is going down. And the last for today's presentation is the land pollution. So main problem with land pollution would be deforestation, but next to it also dumping of solid waste and as well chemical contamination. Basically, soil contamination happens when waste is not discharged properly. By its nature, land can be contaminated by some of the following waste types. So industrial waste or urban waste or agricultural waste. Also radioactive and biological agents. The most common chemicals involved are petroleum hydrocarbons or polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons as naphthalene and benzopyrene, then solvents, pesticides, lead, and other heavy metals. Also xenobiotics in general, they're under most considered like cosmetics or house cleaning products, also drugs, as well as radioactive waste like uranium, radium, potassium, and so on. They can be blamed for polluting soil. Soil gets a large amount of human, animal, and bird excreta, which constitute a major source of land pollution by biological agents. Also, heavily application of manures and digestive slugs can cause serious damage to plants within a few years. So even if we use, as I mentioned, those biological or degradable wastes under not controlled well or with the higher level than the land can cope with, they become direct pollutants as bad as any other chemical or physical pollutant. Of course, the untreated wastes, like solid wastes, of course they're visually really bad, but also they attract some animals like mosquitoes or rats, which move a lot. They live in different places, and they can transfer the diseases that are developed on those wastelands under those not treated well conditions, so high humidity and high temperatures. Degradation of organic matter happens, and of course a lot of bacteria developed. So different, like in the terms of agents of animals, like as I mentioned, mosquitoes or most known the rats, they can transfer those potential illnesses into the populated areas, and in some areas they're populated too much, so the diseases can break down into epidemia really easily. So they need to be the dumping areas really need to be managed well. And the main trouble is that the science is already developed in these areas. People know a lot how to treat and how to maintain and how to recycle, but the application is happening really slow, and it's only present in developed part of the world. In the rest of the world, it's really low, and that's why ecologists need really to work on the application of already gained knowledge, but also to get to learn much more of these processes happening in the nature and how we affect it and how it can be stopped. So as I mentioned from the next presentation, we will talk more about effects of these pollutions and how can we stop and treat them. So if you find these subjects interesting, please stay tuned and follow us further, the Wikipedia and myself. So till the next presentations, bye.